You walk into a room filled with people. The air feels heavy, not because of silence, but because of a strange, invisible agreement. No one says it out loud, but everyone seems to share the same thought, the same reaction, the same judgment. You notice something is wrong, glaring, obvious to your eyes, but when you glance around, not a single person acknowledges it. In that moment, a question burns inside you. Do I trust my own perception, or do I surrender to a comfort of the crowd? Here lies the silent battlefield of every human soul. The war between the truth you feel within yourself and the collective voice that surrounds you. What is more terrifying, that you might be wrong, or that everyone else might be pretending? This is the prison of groupthink. It is not enforced by chains or locked doors, but by something far more powerful, the human fear of standing alone. You may not see it, but you have lived inside its walls. When you stayed silent in a conversation because you feared the judgment of others. When you laughed at a joke you didn't find funny. When you nodded in agreement while your heart screamed in protest. The paradox is sharp and cruel. As social beings, we crave belonging more than almost anything else, yet it is precisely this craving that blinds us. We trade authenticity for acceptance, truth for security, individuality for the illusion of unity. But here is the haunting question. What if unity is sometimes nothing more than a shared delusion? Think about how history has unfolded. Entire societies swept up in ideologies, nations committing atrocities, not because individuals were monsters, but because they surrendered their minds to collective. Think about the subtle ways it lives in you, at your workplace, in your friendships, in your family. How many times have you sacrificed what you truly believed for the sake of harmony? The greatest tragedies of humanity are rarely the work of isolated individuals. They are the outcome of masses, moving in unison, convinced of their righteousness. And the scariest part is this: those masses include people like you, people like me, people who never woke up to ask, am I thinking for myself, or am I just borrowing the mind of the group? This question matters because the line between truth and illusion is fragile. Groupthink doesn't announce itself with warnings or alarms. It seeps in quietly, hidden beneath laughter, consensus, and tradition. It convinces you that silence is wisdom, that agreement is safety, and that doubt is weakness. And by the time you realize you've surrendered your mind, the group has already claimed your voice, your courage, your freedom. So the real danger is not in disagreeing with the group. It is in never daring to. Pause here and confront this. How many of your beliefs are truly your own? And how many have you inherited without question, absorbed because everyone else seemed to carry them? Do you belong to your own mind, or to the invisible cage of collective thought? There lies the great paradox. The group promises strength, but in truth it weakens the individual. The group promises safety, but in truth it robs you of freedom. And so the question you must face is this: will you live as one among the many, or dare to walk as one against them? Because perhaps the only way to truly belong is first to stand alone. What makes you surrender your voice to the crowd? Why does the pulse of the group beat louder than the whisper of your own conscience? The answer lies deep within the architecture of the human psyche. We are creatures born fragile, dependent, and vulnerable. From the first breath, survival meant connection. The infant who cried was comforted only when another responded. The child who strayed from the tribe was the one most likely to vanish into the jaws of predators. This ancient truth still lingers in the marrow of your being. To be excluded is to die. Carl Jung once said that loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. In other words, the pain of isolation is not just physical absence, but the existential terror of not being seen, not being recognized as part of the whole. To protect ourselves from that wound, we wear masks, we echo the voices of others, and we pretend to align, even when we ache with dissonance inside. But beneath this survival instinct is something even darker. Nietzsche warned that the greatest danger to the individual is the herd. The herd whispers, "Don't question, don't deviate, don't resist." And because the herd offers the warmth of belonging, its seduction is irresistible. What you don't realize is that in choosing the herd, you often abandon the very essence of yourself. Psychologically, this is reinforced by mechanisms you may not even notice. Social psychologist Solomon Asch's famous conformity experiments revealed just how fragile your independence truly is. When surrounded by others giving clearly false answers, most people would abandon their own correct perception just to align with the group. Not because they were blind, but because the fear of isolation outweighed the courage of truth. Think about that. The eyes can see, but the mind can betray itself to avoid standing alone. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that most people would rather believe what the crowd believes than face the agony of thinking for themselves. Why? Because independent thought carries weight. It carries responsibility. When you think alone, you stand alone. And in a world where the crowd roars with confidence, solitude feels like madness. Yet, paradoxically, the crowd does not think. It only repeats. Groupthink is not thought at all. It is the suspension of thought. It thrives on the illusion of agreement, while silencing doubt, fear, and dissent. The philosopher Aldous Huxley foresaw this danger, warning that the most terrifying form of control is not external oppression, but voluntary self-surrender. When you censor yourself to fit in, no tyrant is needed. You become your own jailer. But let's go deeper still. Sartre argued that freedom is a burden, not a gift. To be free means to be responsible for every choice, every belief, every action. Most people don't want that. They crave the comfort of the crowd because the crowd lifts that burden from their shoulders. If the group is wrong, at least you are not wrong alone. If the group chooses destruction, at least you will not be destroyed in isolation. There is a kind of twisted comfort in shared downfall. The problem, then, is not just social. It is existential. The human being is torn between two primal fears: the fear of losing oneself in isolation and the fear of losing oneself in conformity. Groupthink exploits both. It whispers, "Stay here with us. You will not be alone. You will not have to carry the unbearable weight of freedom. You will be safe." But the safety is an illusion. Viktor Frankl, who endured the horror of concentration camps, wrote that meaning cannot be borrowed. It must be chosen. To give away your mind to the group is to surrender the very possibility of meaning. And yet, millions do it every day, not out of malice, but out of fear. This is why groupthink is so insidious. It does not feel like coercion. It feels like harmony. It feels like belonging. It feels like home. The hidden problem is that this home is built on silence, and silence can be deadly. Silence in the face of lies. Silence in the presence of injustice. Silence when your own soul begs you to speak. And so you find yourself caught in a paradox with no easy escape. If you resist, you risk exile. If you conform, you risk losing your soul. But perhaps the deeper tragedy is this. Most people never realize they're trapped at all. They live and die inside the illusion of consensus, never questioning whose voice they echo, never daring to ask if it is their own. The roots of groupthink, then, are not merely cultural or historical. They are embedded in the human condition. And until you confront that truth, you remain vulnerable to its pull. But if this is the root, what about the fruit? What about the unseen consequences it spills into your daily life, your relationships, your society? That is where the real danger begins to unfold. What happens when you silence your own voice long enough? When you trade authenticity for acceptance so many times that you forget the difference? The tragedy of groupthink is not always loud or catastrophic. It is often quiet, subtle, and slow, like rust eating away at steel. It corrodes your inner world until you no longer recognize what is truly yours and what has been implanted by others. At first, the consequences seem invisible. You tell yourself it's harmless, agreeing with the group on small things, bending your words to fit the tone of the room. You nod when others nod. You laugh when others laugh. But little by little, something inside you begins to wither. You feel a dull emptiness, a vague disconnection from yourself, as though you are wearing clothes that don't quite fit, but are too afraid to take off. Cognitive psychology shows us why this emptiness grows. When your inner beliefs clash with your outward actions, you experience cognitive dissonance. At first, the discomfort is sharp. You know you're betraying your true thoughts. But over time, to protect yourself, your brain adapts. It erases the discomfort by reshaping your beliefs to align with your behavior. You don't just pretend to believe what the group believes. You eventually convince yourself it is true. This is the quiet theft of groupthink. It doesn't just silence your voice, it rewires your mind. The consequences ripple outward. Individually, you lose clarity, authenticity, and courage. Collectively, societies lose wisdom, creativity, and truth. When everyone thinks the same, innovation dies. When everyone agrees, lies thrive. The greatest errors in history were not committed by solitary madmen, but by crowds marching in unison, each convinced they were right, because no one dared to question. Think about this in your own life. How many times have you avoided speaking up at work, even when you knew the decision being made was flawed? How many times have you stayed silent in a group of friends, afraid your honesty might disturb the fragile harmony? These small silences build into habits, and habits build into identity. Before you know it, you no longer ask, "What do I believe?" You only ask, "What will they think if I say this?" The unseen consequence is that you slowly stop living as a person and start existing as a mirror. You reflect the group back to itself, but there is no you left in the reflection. Neurologically, this is reinforced by the brain's wiring. The human brain contains mirror neurons, cells that light up when you observe someone else's actions, as though you were performing them yourself. This makes us empathetic, but it also makes us vulnerable. When the group reacts with fear, you feel fear. When the group reacts with excitement, you feel excitement, even if you don't know why. And so, in the silence of conformity, you inherit emotions that are not yours, judgments that are not yours, and fears that are not yours. The danger is not just personal. On a societal level, groupthink births conformity that suffocates truth. Consider whistleblowers who tried to raise alarms but were silenced by their peers. Consider scientists who feared ridicule and kept quiet about groundbreaking discoveries. Consider leaders who surrounded themselves with advisors too afraid to disagree until disaster struck. History is littered with examples where the silence of many empowered the destruction of all. But the most haunting consequence is the loss of meaning. When you live by the voice of the group, your life is no longer your own. Viktor Frankl argued that meaning arises when you respond authentically to life's demands. But if your responses are borrowed, if your words are echoes, then the meaning you build is hollow. You may achieve success, acceptance, even admiration, but deep down, you feel the emptiness of living someone else's life. And here lies the deepest wound of groupthink. You can be surrounded by people, yet utterly alone. You belong to the group, but not to yourself. You have friends, but no intimacy. You have agreement, but no authenticity. The world applauds you for fitting in, but inside, a quiet voice whispers, "This is not who I am." That voice is dangerous to the group, which is why the group pressures you to silence it. But it is also the only hope you have of waking up. Because the question is no longer whether groupthink affects you. It already does. The real question is, how far has it gone? How much of your life is truly yours? And if you recognize the weight of that question, then perhaps you are ready to face the next challenge, the rebellion, the breaking free. Because freedom, though terrifying, is the only cure for the invisible disease of conformity. If groupthink is the invisible prison, then rebellion is the act of breaking the lock, not with violence, not with chaos, but with the quiet courage of thinking for yourself. But here's the paradox. Freedom is not comfortable. It is raw, heavy, and often lonely. The group promises ease. Freedom demands effort. The group gives you answers. Freedom forces you to live with questions. The group offers belonging. Freedom often begins with exile. And yet, rebellion is necessary, because without it, you never truly live. How does one rebel? Not against society itself, but against the silent, suffocating habit of surrendering one's mind. The first step is awareness. To see the walls of your prison is already to begin breaking them. As Jung once noted, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Groupthink thrives in the unconscious. When you follow without knowing, agree without noticing, conform without choosing. The rebellion begins by catching yourself in those small moments. The nod you give when you disagree, the silence you hold when your truth burns to be spoken, the borrowed opinions you repeat because they sound safe. Awareness is a weapon. Once you see the cage, you can choose. The second step is solitude. This is the step most fear. Solitude is not loneliness. It is the discipline of facing yourself without distraction. Nietzsche called it the path of becoming who you are. Sartre called it the weight of authentic freedom. In solitude, you hear your own voice clearly, stripped from the noise of the crowd. But solitude is frightening because it reveals how much of you has been shaped by others. To rebel, you must endure that fear. The third step is dissent. To speak the truth you see, even when it trembles out of your mouth. Not to argue for the sake of argument, not to provoke for the sake of pride, but to refuse the silence that groupthink demands. Every time you speak your truth, you reclaim a piece of your soul. History honors those who dared dissent. Think of Galileo, standing against the powerful consensus that declared the Earth the center of the universe. Think of Rosa Parks, refusing to give up her seat on that bus, defying a system sustained by collective agreement. These acts did not shatter the world overnight, but they cracked the illusion of unanimity, and through those cracks, light entered. But rebellion is not only external, it must also be internal. You must challenge the voices within you that echo the crowd. That means asking yourself relentlessly, do I believe this because I see it as true, or because I fear the cost of disagreement? This question, asked honestly, dismantles the unconscious programming of groupthink. The fourth step is courage, and courage, as Aristotle said, is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. You will be afraid. You will feel the sting of judgment, the chill of being misunderstood, the ache of being left out. But courage transforms that pain into power. Every act of courage weakens the grip of the herd over your mind. But rebellion does not mean rejecting the group entirely. Humans are social beings. We need one another. The danger is not in belonging. It is in belonging at the cost of the self. True rebellion is not isolation. It is the ability to walk into the group without losing yourself within it, to stand in the crowd and still carry your own flame. This is the highest form of belonging, not belonging that demands conformity, but the belonging that arises when authentic individuals gather. Imagine a society built not on silence, but on the courage of voices, not on repetition, but on truth. That is what rebellion creates. Yet there is still a deeper layer. To rebel is not only to resist the group, it is to create new ways of thinking, new ways of being, new ways of seeing the world. Creativity is rebellion in its purest form, because it breaks the cycle of repetition and brings something original into existence. When you write words no one else dared write, when you live in a way that others fear, you declare with your existence, I am not an echo, I am a voice. Rebellion is not loud. Sometimes it is the quiet refusal to laugh at a cruel joke. Sometimes it is the decision to walk away from a circle that demands your silence. Sometimes it is the trembling confession of your true opinion in a room that would rather not hear it. Small acts, but together they form the architecture of freedom. And so the rebellion is not a war against others. It is a war against the fear within yourself. Fear of exile, fear of judgment, fear of solitude. Break those fears, and you break the spell of groupthink. But here is the final twist. Rebellion does not end with freedom. Freedom is only the beginning. Once you are free, you must face the ultimate question. What will you do with your freedom? Because freedom without direction is emptiness, and emptiness can be just as dangerous as conformity. Which leads us to the final, most powerful realization, the ultimate truth that waits beyond the rebellion. You have broken free from the grip of the crowd. You have endured solitude, faced judgment, and reclaimed your voice. But freedom alone is not enough. Because the moment you step outside the prison of groupthink, you encounter a vast, terrifying landscape, the rawness of life without borrowed maps. This is where many falter. They escape the herd, but then collapse under the unbearable weight of freedom. For freedom is not a gift, it is a responsibility. And this is the ultimate truth. Once you are free, you can no longer blame the crowd for your choices. You are accountable to yourself. You must carve meaning into the wilderness of existence with your own hands. Nietzsche warned of this moment. He said that the death of false gods, the collapse of illusions, leaves humanity standing in a void. The herd offers ready-made answers, borrowed beliefs, easy comforts. When you walk away, all of that dissolves. What is left? Silence, vastness, a dizzying confrontation with the unknown. And in that void, the temptation arises to return to the herd, to surrender your freedom for the comfort of borrowed certainty. But here lies the deepest paradox of all. Only in facing that void does true meaning emerge. Viktor Frankl, who endured the unspeakable horrors of the concentration camps, discovered that meaning is not given, it is chosen. The group may offer survival, but it cannot give you purpose. Purpose is born in the moment you say yes to your own freedom. Yes to the responsibility of being fully alive. Even when the world robs you of everything else, you still hold the freedom to choose how you respond. That choice, yours alone, is what transforms suffering into meaning. The ultimate truth, then, is this. Freedom is not about separation from others, but about authenticity within them. You were never meant to be an island, but you were also never meant to be a shadow. To live authentically is to stand in the group with your own voice intact, to belong without surrendering, to love without losing yourself. Imagine a world where people no longer hide behind the mask of groupthink, where every individual speaks with courage, not echoing, but creating. A world where truth is not silenced by fear, where meaning is not borrowed, but forged. This is not a utopia. It is a possibility, one that begins with you. But you must understand, authenticity is not safe. It will cost you. People will misunderstand you. Some will mock you. Others will exile you. But the price of silence is far greater. Silence robs you of your soul. Authenticity may cost you comfort, but it gives you life. The greatest act of rebellion is not shouting against the world. It is whispering the truth when the world demands silence. It is carrying your freedom with dignity, refusing to bow to illusions even when everyone else kneels. And perhaps the final realization is this. Groupthink is not merely a social problem. It is a spiritual one. It asks you to betray the essence of who you are. To break it is not just to reclaim your mind, but to reclaim your being. To say, I am here, not as an echo, not as a mask, but as myself. So the question is no longer whether you will think for yourself. The question is, will you have the courage to live the life that emerges once you do? Because here lies the truth most people never face. The crowd will not remember your silence, but you will. The world may not applaud your authenticity, but your soul will. And when the final silence comes, the silence of the end, you will ask yourself not whether you belonged, but whether you lived as who you truly were. Freedom is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a deeper one, the story of you. And so, the choice stands before you. Return to the comfort of the crowd, or walk the lonelier, harder path of authenticity. One promises safety, the other promises life. Which will you choose?